All right, picture Bunkle on the stoop. Late evening, city noise humming low, coffee cooling off in his hand. He's not arguing with anyone out loud. He's just thinking. But tonight, you can hear both sides of that thinking. You ever noticed how some debates don't really sound like debates anymore? They sound like two people using the same words, but meaning completely different things. Take this whole conversation about systemic racism. Some folks say it's everywhere, built into the structure of society. Others say the system today is legally neutral and outcomes are driven more by class, culture, and individual decisions. So let's slow it down a bit. Let's actually hear both sides and let them talk to each other for a minute. Because maybe the stoop isn't a courtroom with a gavel. Maybe it's just a place where ideas sit next to each other long enough to see what still holds up. First argument you usually hear is about disparities in outcomes. One voice says, look at the numbers. Income gaps, incarceration rates, education outcomes. When the same patterns repeat across large populations, that suggests something structural is happening. Systems don't have to announce bias out loud to produce unequal results. And then the other voice leans back and says, or those differences might reflect the mix of economic background, family structure, neighborhood conditions, and education quality. If multiple factors can explain disparities, why assume the system itself is the primary driver? And now Bunkle's sitting there thinking, well, patterns do raise questions, but patterns alone don't automatically reveal causes. Correlation can point you somewhere, but it doesn't always tell you exactly where to stop. So maybe the real tension here is whether unequal outcomes must always mean unequal systems, or whether they sometimes reflect unequal starting points shaped by a lot of different forces. Then comes the argument about historical legacy. One side says you can't ignore history. Policies like segregation and redlining didn't just disappear without consequences. Wealth gaps and opportunity gaps can echo across generations, even after laws change. The other side nods but pushes back. History matters, sure, but at some point you have to ask whether current institutions are still enforcing those patterns, or whether society has shifted enough that present-day dynamics are more influenced by economics and culture than policies that no longer exist. And now Bunkle's swirling his coffee, thinking. History absolutely leaves fingerprints, but time also reshapes structures. So the question becomes, how long do past systems continue to shape present outcomes, and how much weight should they carry compared to present-day variables? That's not a simple yes or no kind of thing. That's a timeline question, and timelines don't always have clean endpoints. Next, you hear the argument about implicit bias. One voice says, even if laws are neutral, people inside institutions can still carry unconscious biases. Those biases, multiplied across thousands of decisions, could tilt outcomes in subtle ways. The other voice replies, maybe, but bias exists in all directions, across all groups. And if we attribute every unequal outcome to bias, we risk overlooking other explanations, like differences in experience, behavior, or local conditions. And now Bunkle's looking out at people walking by, thinking, human beings aren't robots. Bias exists, but so does variation in circumstance and choice. The real challenge is figuring out when bias is the dominant factor and when it's just one ingredient in a much bigger recipe. Because if everything is bias, then nothing can be measured clearly. And if bias is ignored entirely, then subtle influences might go unnoticed. Then there's the debate about policy design versus policy impact. One side says policies can be neutral on paper, but still affect communities differently in practice. Outcomes matter just as much as intent. The other side answers, But if policies don't mention race and apply equally under the law, then calling them systemic racism might stretch the definition. Unequal effects don't always mean unequal design. And now Bunkles tapping the cup against the railing, thinking, intent and impact aren't always the same thing, but definitions matter too. If the word systemic expands to include any unequal outcome, the term itself starts to lose precision. So maybe part of this debate isn't just about policies, it's about language, about what exactly we mean when we use certain labels. Now the conversation shifts to individual agency versus structural barriers. One voice argues access to quality schools, strong networks, and safe neighborhoods isn't evenly distributed. Those structural differences shape life trajectories long before personal choices fully kick in. The other voice counters. True, but individuals still make decisions within those environments. People in similar conditions can end up with very different outcomes, which suggests agency and culture play powerful roles too. There are many immigrants who, due to their families pushing them to succeed, and they live in the same neighborhoods and go to the same schools, and they succeed in spite of their environment. And now Bunkle sighs a little because that one hits deep. Structures matter, choices matter. And maybe the hardest truth is that both can be true at the same time. Some people start further back. Some people run different races on the same track. But people still run, still stumble, still adapt in ways no system fully predicts. Now, let's flip the lens to the other side's core claims. They often start with legal equality. One voice says, today's laws are race neutral. Explicit discrimination is illegal. If the system's written rules don't favor one race over another, calling it systemic racism might not accurately describe the present legal structure. The opposing voice responds, legal neutrality doesn't automatically erase structural momentum. A system can be neutral in wording, but still influenced by patterns set in motion decades earlier. And now Bunkle thinks, law is the skeleton of a system, but culture, economics, and history are the muscles and nerves. Changing the skeleton doesn't instantly rewire everything else. Then comes the argument about socio-economic factors. One side says income level, family stability, education access, and geography often predict outcomes stronger than race alone. Maybe class dynamics are the bigger driver today. The other side answers, but race and class are often intertwined because of historical factors. Separating them completely might oversimplify how those variables interact. And now Bunkle's nodding slowly. Maybe we're arguing about which variable is primary, when reality might be that several variables are tangled together so tightly you can't cleanly isolate one without touching the others. And then there's the point about institutional reforms. One voice says civil rights laws, anti-discrimination policies, and diversity initiatives show that institutions are actively trying to prevent racism, not embed it. The other voice replies, efforts to reduce bias don't automatically prove the problem is fully resolved. Reforms can exist precisely because lingering issues are still being addressed. And now Bunkle shrugs slightly. A system trying to fix itself suggests awareness, but awareness doesn't always equal completion. Reform is a process, not a finish line. Finally, there's the debate over definitions themselves. One voice argues people may be using the term systemic racism to mean unequal outcomes, while others reserve the term for explicitly discriminatory laws. If definitions differ, the disagreement might be partly semantic. The other voice agrees, but adds, and when definitions shift, conversations can spiral, because each side thinks the other is denying reality, when they might just be using different frameworks. And that's where Bunkle pauses the longest, because maybe that's the quiet center of the whole thing.
Not just disagreement over the raw facts, but disagreement over what the words are supposed to mean. So where does that leave us? Well, the stoop isn't really a judge's bench. It's more like a place where complicated questions sit long enough to breathe. Maybe unequal outcomes can raise legitimate questions about structure. Maybe multiple variables, history, class, culture, family structure, attitudes, personal decisions are all interacting at one time. Maybe institutions have changed in important ways, but change doesn't erase every long-term effect overnight. But how long is reasonable? How much time should pass before you are responsible for your own choices? Maybe the word systemic itself is carrying different definitions depending on who's speaking. And maybe, just maybe, the loudest fights we see aren't always about the raw facts themselves, but which lens people are choosing to look through. So tonight,
Bunkle doesn't bang a gavel. He just sets the coffee down, looks out at the street, and wonders if two people can look at the same country, the same data, the same history, and walk away with completely different conclusions. Is the real divide always in the evidence, or sometimes in the assumptions we bring before we even start looking? And that's the part the stoop hands back to you. Let me know what you think in the comments. Bunkle here, hoping for a civil discussion on this, here on Stoop Court. Stop back again sometime, as Stoop Court will be deconstructing other topics, just like this one.
Hey y'all, I hope this helped you understand this stuff a little better. Let me know in the comments, and let me know if there is a topic you are curious about. Maybe I can help. You can also check out these two videos. Hope they help you. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hype this video. Always appreciate y'all, and thanks for stopping by the stoop. God bless always.